Welcome, everyone. My name is Nikki Johnston, and I'm with Transition Advisors. Our webinar today is the 7-step roadmap for your merger, acquisition, or sale. Before we begin, we'll need to cover just a few important items. First, please close any other programs that you have running on your computer. This will help to ensure quality presentation and reduce any audio issues. Transition Advisors LLC is a proud and approved sponsor on the National Registry of CPA Sponsors per NASBA. In order for you to receive your 1 CPE credit for today, you must complete 2 requirements. The first is that you participate in 3 out of the 4 polling questions that we'll have throughout today's presentation. And do note that GoToWebinar monitors your participation in those polls. Next, you'll also need to complete an online evaluation. And if you registered for today's webinar directly through Transition Advisors, you'll receive a link to that survey in an email from me later this afternoon. Once you've met both of those requirements, we'll send your CPE certificate via email within 10 business days. Now, in order to fully participate in the webinar, please take just a moment to familiarize yourself with the control panel. You'll see that on the right-hand side of your screen. There's an orange arrow near the top that you can use to minimize that control panel. During the presentation, all participants are muted, but if you'd like to communicate with us, you can just type your question into the box at the bottom of that panel and click Send. Questions are important to us, and time permitting, Joel will answer any questions that you have at the end of the presentation today. Now finally, I'd like to remind you that Transition Advisors offers a free 1-hour CPE webinar each month. You can see our upcoming sessions there on the screen. Our topics include keys to your partnership agreement, a Back to the Future session in December, and then how tax season impacts M&A in January. You can view a complete list of our webinars, including links to register for them, on the CPE course section of transitionadvisors.com. Now, before I turn it over to Joel, I'll go ahead and launch the first polling question for today. You can see there on your screen, the question is, how many partners are in your firm? So please take just a moment to answer there. And we'll keep the polling questions open today for about 30 seconds each to give everyone plenty of time to answer them. Okay, it looks like everybody has answered. We'll go ahead and close that poll and share the results. Joel, 86% of the folks on the call today have 1 to 2 partners in their firm. 9% are in that 3 to 8 range, and then the remaining 5% are in the 9 to 20 range. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today's session. Joel Sinkin is the President of Transition Advisors. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope you all enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and welcome everybody. For those of you who've heard me speak before, welcome back to Elm Street. I remain Freddie, and today we're going to do a session that helps you give you a roadmap to follow so that if you want to enter into a merger acquisition on your own, what is the very beginning of the process to closing your deal? We'll also address a little bit about the roadblocks that you should anticipate coming along this path, how to navigate those roadblocks, and a little bit about client retention and the keys to doing that. The attendees, based on our first polling question, are very typical in size to the bulk of the firms in this country. You know, a lot of people think of and talk a lot about the big firms, but there's 45,000 CPA firms that are members of the AICPA. So you have your top 100, and then you have your G400, which is the second category that brings you to about 10 million annually. Then you have the other 44,500 firms. So all of you represent the bulk of the community. So let's walk down this path and figure out how we're going to go about structuring and going into this whole process in the merger and acquisition world. Prior to doing so, I never want to turn a CPE class into an infomercial. I find that actually very distasteful. But I do think it's important to have a little bit of a background of the speaker. For the last 26 years, the only thing I've done to help accounting firms in buy, sell, and merging of their practices, partnership agreements, things related to succession and growth strategies. That's really the main part of what we're doing. I've been involved in over 750 closings of accounting firms over these 20 plus years. So fortunately, you're listening to me in 2015 because all the mistakes that we've seen and that 5 years, we try not to make the same mistake twice. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is how to navigate these things and what we've seen, what issues have arisen, and trying to create a smooth path as possible. So that's today's step, the process, and we're going to focus on 7 main steps that we're going to take to go from introduction to closing. I guess we got some duplicates. You know, the one challenging thing about all these types of discussions about mergers and acquisitions is if there's 50 things you need to know about completing a transaction, the smartest person in the room is going to think of 35. And we're not going to be able to get you to 50 today in a 1-hour CPE class. You know, every practice is extremely unique. If you take 5 practices doing the same revenue in the same marketplace with the same amount of partners, that might be the only things they have in common. So while we're going to be able to put you on a path today, things that are exceptions, that are unusual and very subjective. So hopefully we're going to get you so that most of what you run into you can address, and hopefully common sense will prevail in the things you can't. Before you even start down the road, the first step when entering into the marketplace to look into mergers or acquisitions is understanding why you're doing this. What are your goals? All right? Usually there's 2 main goals in a merger. The first one is growth. I'm looking to grow. Now, that could be growth in many ways. It could be growth of revenue. It could be growth of talent. It could be adding a new marketplace. It could be adding a new niche. So there's many different aspects of growth, but growth is certain people entertain merger and acquisitions. The other reason, as challenging as this sounds, is to solve a problem. Not all problems are bad problems. For example, last week I had a firm in the Midwest reach out to us that they have 3 fantastic young partners, but they don't want to reduce their income and their equity to do so. So they're looking to acquire a firm by bringing in those additional revenues. That will be their method of being able to make these people partners without giving up their own income. So a problem could be that I'm looking to slow down over the next 3, 4, 5 years, and I need a succession plan because I don't have the talent on the bench internally to execute that. Or for many of you who are in those 2 to 5 partner firms on the phone with us today, many of you might have 4 partners, of which 2 want to slow down over the next 5 years and don't want to slow down for 20 years, but they lack the capacity to replace the 2 of you. So that's a firm that has 2 goals: partners that are looking to grow and other partners that are with succession plan. So the important thing going into this whole process is understanding what are your goals. You can't even start down a path till you know what success looks like. And once you determine that, it helps you create structure of both the deal and a vision of what success and the successor firm should look like. So for example, if I'm looking for a solution for succession, I need a firm that has the capacity and skill set to replace me. So once I understand my goal, it starts us down the path. And now that we're on the path, let's look at the 7 steps that we're going to discuss today. The first one is putting together some sort of generic practice information about what you have and what your goals are. Within that, we want to organize what's our must-haves, what's our breakers, what are the most important things to us. Then the third step is identifying what our successor should look like, or the firm that we're looking to acquire. Then our 4th step is to have our initial meetings. Our 5th step is to get proposals. Our 6th step is due diligence, and our 7th is closing the deal. So simple. What a shame it never works out that way. But let's look at each of these steps now individually and get our arms around them a little bit better. The first step, once I've decided what my goals are, and I'm looking to merge up, for example, or seek succession, is I should be putting together a very detailed practice information sheet. Now, I should not be putting my clients' names or anything that's highly confidential in this information. So I use the term very specifically, a generic practice information. But let's look at what it shouldn't have. For those who are interested in examples of forms, you could always email me and I can give you an example. But one of the main forms I use, I break it down into 2 pages. Let's start with page 2. Page 2, I'm going to have the firm's metrics. What's our gross revenues? What are the services rendered? For example, what percentage is audit versus comp, review, consulting, tax, write-up? What kind of staff do I have? How many partners? How many CPAs? How many paraprofessionals? How many are full-time, part-time? What's our billing rates? How profitable are we? What kind of income are we making? What kind of software are we using? What kind of lease do we have? So I'm going to put down a whole bunch of very detailed metric information. I'm not giving you my clients' names or anything that's going to put me in harm's way. But if you look at this sheet, you should have a pretty good idea of what I have. For example, just in the last week in the New York area, we developed a practice that does a lot of broker-dealer work. Well, that's a very important part of putting it in there, because if someone calls us up and says, what's a focus report? Well, that means they're not ready to take on a broker-dealer practice. So putting this information together is really important, and that's page 2. Page 1 is more about what are our goals. So, for example, if we're a 2-partner firm and Nikki's young and I'm looking for succession, our first page might say, hey, we're 2 partners, we're doing about $800,000, we're located in Florida, and we're looking at an affiliation that enables me to gradually slow down and be paid for my years of sweat equity in a buyout, while Nikki maintains her current compensation, reasonable control and autonomy, and participates in the growth of the successor firm. That might be an example of our goals. So on page 1, I've kind of put together who we are and what we're trying to get done. A little bit more than just the metrics, a lot about our goals. And I'll even be very specific about certain terms. For example, if I'm looking at a succession plan, I'm going to talk about what I'm looking for in compensation. If it's a merger, I don't know a lot of people that will even entertain a merger wherein if they bring in the same revenue and put in the same time and effort, they'd consider less income. So we're going to put down all of these very important points and ultimately have 2 pages. Page 1 basically says what we want, and page 2 basically says what we have. Now, while we're drafting this generic practice description, I'm going to be pretty specific about my deal structure. Is it a sale? Is it a merger? If it is a merger, what type? Am I merging up? Am I looking to merge talent in? Is it a merger about cross-selling services? That I do a lot of wealth management. I'm looking for a firm that has a lot of high net worth individuals. Is it a 2-stage deal? The deal where someone's looking to stay on and retain control and income, but commence a transition that leads to an ultimate buyout? Is it some sort of combination, sale and merger? What compensation I'm looking for, what value I see. So when someone gets this description from me, they should be able to really get a good sense of who I am and what I'm trying to accomplish for them to make a decision if this is something that makes sense to their firm as well. Now, part of putting this practice summary together is organizing and including your must-haves. Now, let me start by saying the best thing you could do is have as few must-haves as possible. A must-have is a breaker. A must-have isn't a preference, it's a must-have. Here's an example of a must-have that is disappointing, but I see all the time. Hey, I'm looking to sell my practice, but I have 4 years left on my lease. I'm on the hook personally. You have to retain it. Well, I get that. Now, I shouldn't have put myself in that position of signing that lease. I should have entertained my merger before I took an extension so that I didn't burden my successor with it and end up losing 80% of the people that may have been interested who won't be because of this lease. But if it's a must-have, it's a must-have, because I'm not going to sell you my practice and pay rent on my building. So that's an example of a must-have. A must-have often that I see that's very fair is, hey, I'm a 3-partner firm. One of us is looking to get out. 2 of us are looking to stay on, and we're going to stay on as equity partners, and we're not going to make less money, assuming that we bring in the same revenue and time and effort. That's a must-have. what shouldn't be a must-have are certain other things. Occasionally, they still will be because, listen, I'm not the decision maker. The firm's owners are. But I had a firm call me up in New England a couple of weeks ago and was only willing to work with a firm, even though it was a succession plan, if they had the same technology and software that the seller was using. I profusely argued about that point. And I said to them, here you are facing the last and most important decision that relates to your practice. You met, but I use Lacert, you use CCH, and that means I'm not good for you. I mean, it just seemed to be silly. I get it as a preference. I don't get it as a must-have. But if it's a must-have, I've had many people that have a great deal of loyalty to certain staff members and who say, hey, you must retain them. Now, obviously, it's going to be really hard to get a successor firm to give someone a lifetime or multi-year contract. But, many of these times you see someone say, hey, look, you got to keep them for the first year. If they don't prove their value to you after a year, shame on them. But I'm convinced if you kept them a year, you'll see why it's so critical to keep them. So I get that. Name of firm, a lot of people want to make a big deal about. I will tell you that very few small firms, if any, have a true brand. A brand means the clients are married to the brand. All of you on this call are relatively small firms. I will guess that all of you don't have brand loyal clients. You have partner loyal clients. And if you do the transition correctly, and their faith is in you, not the name of the firm, you'll find that name is less important. But at the end of today's session, we'll talk more about retaining clients and how names and things like that fit in. So in my practice summary sheet, if I have a must-have, if I must make the same compensation, if I must have equity day one, if you must keep my location, these are things that belong in what? This 2-page or sometimes 3-page profile that we're putting together. Once we have this completely ready, then we go to our next step and we start to look for what does our merger partner look like? Well, to me, the first things I always focus on, and if you've read any of the articles, books, or attended CP I've taught before, you've probably heard this from me, and that's my big 4 C's. They are, in not particularly this order, culture, chemistry, continuity, and capacity. Let's take a little bit deeper look at each. Culture is a term that I could ask 5 partners and I'll get 5 different definitions. Culture could be the way you build, the way you dress, the way you service the clients. Culture could be so many different things, but what you believe is your culture, that's very important to make sure that your merger partner has a culture that can adapt and work within yours. There are certain cultures to mix. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But culture is the first part of me looking for the quote-unquote right partner to merge with, the right firm to merge with. Chemistry is usually my starting point. I call it my lunch test. If I don't want to eat lunch with you, I'm not going to do a deal with you. Even if I'm selling. Remember, most of us have partner loyal clients. If the clients are loyal to me, it's because they're comfortable with me. If I'm not comfortable with you, why would I think my clients and staff would be? So to me, the most important C, when venturing down the road to decide who I was going to be my successor firm or mergee, should be the lunch test. Do we pass the lunch test? The next thing is continuity, a huge C. What I'm referring to there is, for example, today I'm speaking to you from Long Island, New York. I know most of you thought my accent was from Georgia, but I fooled you all. I'm actually from New York and actually in New York today. And I am just outside of Nassau County. Nassau County, Long Island, has over 3,000 accounting firms. It has more accounting firms in the one county than any county in the entire country. If I'm in Nassau County, there are hundreds of firms cheaper than me and more expensive than me. There are a plethora of firms to choose from, but my clients chose to be with me. Again, mainly because of me personally, but other things. If I'm going to merge my practice or sell my practice to someone who's got to make wholesale changes in the way we operate, that's a lack of continuity. And a lack of continuity usually will put a huge strain on client retention. which is the most important measure of success of any merger. The clients are retained, the money's there, everybody's happy. The clients aren't retained, it's a disaster. So if the clients like the way my ship is sailing, it's going to be very challenging for me to do a deal with someone who wants to dramatically change that direction. This could be, for example, not just fees, but if a client's used to dealing personally with a partner, and I'm going to sell it to a firm who's going to have a junior deal with a client that was dealing with a partner, that's a lack of continuity. And the last C, I think sometimes the most ignored, and that's capacity. If, for example, Gretchen and I are a two-partner firm doing $1 million, and I want to slow down in 2 years, and she wants to slow down in 5 years, we have to merge with a firm that has the capacity on a partner level to replace 4,500 hours of partner level time over the next few years. Finding staff is terribly challenging today. So if someone's idea of increasing capacity is I'm going to run an ad and hire people, well, good luck. So a very important part is, does someone have the capacity and skill set to replace me? So part of looking for the right merger partner should be these 4 C's. But the rest of it are all just as important. For example, they should tie into our goal. If part of my goal is cross-selling, does your clients and mine make sense for cross-selling? Or if part of my goals are getting a foothold in a marketplace, will your firm have enough people there to be a good representation of our combined firm? Do they have the technical skills, the specialties? Size is a challenging issue because bigger is not always better. Better is better. Bigger is usually better, but only to a point. It's very hard, for example, for a lot of you on the phone today who are sole practitioners to take your firm and merge with a really big firm whose fee structure, whose culture is vastly different than the hand-holding personal nature that you run your practice. Bigger isn't always better. Location can be really important, can be totally unimportant. If all my clients are either visited or mail in the work or on the cloud, my location is only important from a staffing and ownership perspective, not from a client retention. If all my clients physically come to my office, drop off the work, my location is pretty important. Even technology can have an impact on who's your success. I had a firm very recently who said to me that they will only talk about a merger with a firm that's on the cloud, paperless, has multiple monitors for their staff. And I said to them, is that because you're concerned about getting them to your platform could cost $10,000, $15,000 per person to get them to the cloud and paperless and everything? And her answer was, no, Joel. It took us 10 years to get everybody to throw out the paper, to get to this culture of IT. We're not prepared to take a step backwards. So even licenses could be an issue. For example, in the state of New Jersey, if you do municipal accounting work, you have to be a registered municipalities accountant, an RMA. So these are all part of the critical things. Hey, here's my goal. Can they help me attain the goal? And let's look at the 4 big C's and all these things. So before going on to the next critical step, let's get our second polling question done so to make sure you all get your CPE today. Nikki?
Okay, thanks so much, Joel. The second polling question is there on your screen. Which of these best describes your personal situation over the next 5 years? Your options are that you're seeking to reduce your time commitment to the practice. You have some partners that are seeking to reduce their role while others are seeking to grow. You're interested in acquiring or merging in a firm, or you don't envision being involved in any M&A deals. So again, we'll keep it about 10 more seconds to give everyone a chance to select their answer. And keep in mind, you have to do 3 out of the 4 polling questions in order to get your CPE today. Okay, we've got everyone has selected their answer. Joel, 36% of the folks on the call say that they're seeking to reduce their time commitment. 29% are interested in acquiring or merging in, and then 18% each for the some partners seeking to reduce while others are growing, and then the last option of not envisioning being involved in M&A deals.
So 18% just wanted to hear my New York nasally sound. I hope it works out well for you. And 82% are interested in the M&A world. I'm hoping to bring great value to all 100% of you. So we've put together this generic description. We've given a lot of thought to the deal structure, compensation terms, what success looks like, what the partner looks like. Now we've identified some people that meet these categories. We have our initial meeting. The very first thing we do, matter of fact, I try and do it in advance of that meeting, is give them this information. Share with them what the goals are, what our must-haves are. I have a lot of respect for my personal time. I have just as much respect for everybody else's time. So to me, when I hand them this piece of paper in advance of the meeting or at the first meeting, it should be able to tell them very quickly, this is something that if the chemistry's right, if everything else, cultures make sense, is worth pursuing or not. For example, if they don't want to do this, as many tax returns in addition to what they're already doing now as I'm bringing to the table, if my fees make no sense, if the type of clients I have don't interest you, these are things that no matter how well we get along are death to deals. Well, let's get them out on the table. You know, a lot of people want to hold the most challenging things back. Let's fall in love and I'll bring them up later. If it's a breaker, if it's a must-have, if it's our goals, we should be upfront and candid and share them right away. So what I like to do is have this meeting. We give them all the information. Obviously, this written information is going to just spur dialogue with additional information being exchanged, and that's really the goal of our first 1 and 2 meetings. Obviously, if we're having a second meeting, it's because the information we shared is mutually interesting to both parties, and we're looking to share a little bit more. We focused on the culture and the chemistry, and everything seems to make sense. We talked about what success looks like, and we seem to be on the same page. Well, if we've gotten to a second meeting, and we've shared this initial information in detail, either at or prior to the first meeting, we should be fairly committed to each other after just 2 meetings. Now, I know that sounds strange. We've had 2 meetings, and on Joel's suggesting there should be a level of oral commitment. Well, let's remember, most of you, you have 1 or 2 or 3 meetings that you're just schmoozing with each other. Then you start to share information, etc. By sharing this voluminous amount of detailed information prior to the first meeting, what normally took you 3 to 5 meetings to accomplish, we did at that first meeting. That's why it accelerates the process. And I'm not looking to accelerate the process because it's a race. This is actually a marathon, not a sprint. But I'm looking to be efficient in how we all view our time. So I strongly recommend to all of you looking at a merger, this is likely to be the last and most important decision you make relating to your practice. You want a yardstick. So hopefully you're able to meet 2 or 3 or even 4 firms who have interest in your goals and your information, and you've had these 1 or 2 meetings. Now is time to usually narrow the category into, narrow the people we've met into categories. One category I call forget about it. Doesn't mean they're bad people. It just meant in your heart of hearts, you don't think it's a merger that's worth pursuing for whatever reason. Sometimes there's people that are at that in-between, that, hey, I think they might be worthwhile, but I need a little bit more warm and fuzzies. But usually, based on chemistry, culture, whatever it is, there's 1 or 2 firms that stick out the best. I suggest at that point in time, we go to our next step, and we ask those 1 or 2 firms for a non-binding offer. I know this sounds crazy. We've had 2 meetings. We've done basically no due diligence, and Joel's already asking for a non-binding proposal. Well, I have a lot of reasons I do it this way. With the greatest of respect, if I leave things to accountants and lawyers, we'll all starve. But let's look at the process. By the time we've had 2 meetings, I've given you a voluminous amount of information about my firm, my goals. We've had 2 meetings to discuss them in great detail. What I'm basically suggesting to the successor firm at this point in time is I want you to assume I'm the Pope and everything I've told you is the gospel truth, and I'd like you to make me a non-binding offer on what you think success looks like. I've already told you how philosophically and financially I see these deals coming together. I'd like you to share that with me. It's non-binding. It's pending due diligence. Now, there are times people will ask for some additional information. In a merger that I'm involved with in the West Coast right now, we're at that stage, but the mergee asked for a copy of the partnership agreement because of the successor firm, because they'd be merging in as a partner, and that's an appropriate request. I've had people ask for P&Ls and things. So it doesn't mean absolutely no due diligence has been done. What I'm talking about, there hasn't been a full-blown due diligence. So sometimes after the second meeting, we will ask for this non-binding proposal. They may ask us for some bits and pieces of additional information. Let's give it to them. We should be signing non-disclosure agreements by now anyway, but let's give it to them. But let's get an offer. And that offer has to be a complete offer. It has, people who try and negotiate in pieces always run into problems. For example, you can't negotiate the multiple of what I'm going to pay you in retirement if we haven't discussed, is there money up front? How long is the retention period that adjusts based on clients being retained, if any? What's the tax structure of the deal? How long is the payout period? The multiples, the effect, everything else is the cause. I have people who call me up and say, hey, Joel, we finished everything. Can you just draft the agreement and help us plan the transition? And then I find out they haven't discussed the retention period. They haven't discussed the tax allocation, and the seller's thinking they're getting goodwill, and the buyer's thinking it's deferred comp. You cannot negotiate in pieces. So make sure if you make an offer, it includes everything. If there's succession involved, what are the terms? If there's staying on involved, how does compensation work? How does governance work? How does profit distribution work? Let's make sure that we've addressed all the must-haves and the deal structures. Let's put it all down on a piece of paper. We make our non-binding proposal. At that point in time, we're going to see one of three things. Either I'm in left field and you're in right field, and thank God we found it out after 2 meetings, because who the heck wanted to find it out after 15 meetings? Or more likely, one of the other two paths. One, hey, we're fairly close, we need to tweak it a little bit. Additional conversations, additional information exchange will lead to hopefully success. Or in a perfect world, hey, I told you what I wanted, what you've come back with makes sense, let's keep going. Once we have an oral agreement, now is time to perform due diligence. Hopefully by now we've already signed our non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality agreements. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips, no big things, just a couple of quick tips on due diligence. The less than obvious things. If I'm the mergee or the seller, if I'm merging with a firm that's ever done a deal in the past, I should want to speak to the people they did a deal with. See how it went. What were the roadblocks? What was easy? What was hard? Also, I've never had a successor firm not perform due diligence on the firm merging in or they're acquiring. I can tell you how rare the seller or mergee does any. At least run a background check. They're robbing from Peter to pay Paul. You don't want to wake up one day being Peter. Do a professional, financial, and legal check. Malpractice issues, licenses. Heck, put them in Google. Get a little bit about their metrics. I'll tell you, a critical thing to me if I'm merging into a larger firm, how's their retention rates? How many clients are they losing and why? Because if they can't retain their own clients, why in the world would I think they could retain mine? Right? If I'm merging into that firm and I'm going to become a partner, their partnership agreement's the most key document for me to see. That's going to tell me how governance and profit sharing, compensation, buy-ins, buyouts, these are critical things. How am I retired? That I can't imagine getting to due diligence if I'm going to be a partner in the firm and not having this be my very first request. And there are some practices that have special needs, languages, niches, things of that nature. If I'm the successor firm, again, I'm looking at metrics, but one of the most important things to me on the firm I'm merging in is how long they've had their clients. Clients, the same clients, the greater the loyalty. And the greater the loyalty between a client base and the practitioner, the easier it is to transition and retain them. I know that's counterintuitive. You'd think that, hey, the greater the loyalty, the harder it is, but it's actually quite the opposite. We'll talk about that in a bit. Be careful about getting too stuck on billing rates. I had a deal in Texas about 3-4 months ago that the buyer got all upset during due diligence about the billing rates. He was buying in a firm that was run by a sole practitioner doing about $750,000, and the billing rate of the sole practitioner was $200 an hour. And he said, Joel, I got a big problem. Our partners are billing $300 an hour. I said, well, you just did due diligence. Let me ask you a question. Not the hand-holding. That a partner's got to do. But what level staff in your office is going to be doing the work? See, the seller didn't have managers and seniors. The seller did most of the work themselves with some juniors, paras, actually one senior. He said, well, almost all the work the seller's doing would be senior level work in our firm, maybe some of it manager. I said, what's your senior's billing rate? He said, 1.25. I said, I guess they're getting 200 now. See, one of the mistakes people make in due diligence, especially as a successor firm, is looking at a piece of paper and saying that's what it's going to be. No, you got to transpose what it is in that firm to what it would be in the successor firm. For example, billing rates. What if my, as we already said about some aspects of it, but here's another aspect of it. What if my technology is more efficient? It takes me less time and effort to get the work done. Profitability could be the least important thing to me as the successor firm. If I'm acquiring someone's practice who's working out of their home and their net's 90%, is that more valuable to me than another practice that was operating with staff out of an office? It's not the seller's net, it's my net. Practice with no incremental increases in overhead, it's very profitable. If I have to keep your office manager who makes $150,000 a year and gets 8 weeks paid vacation, if I have to keep your location, if you want goodwill instead of a current deduction and a quick payout, see, the profitability that I'm looking at in due diligence is the profitability of the deal, right? We have to make sure that we're going to be able to keep things running in a similar way about continuity, because if we're going to have to make wholesale changes, it's time to walk away. And let's remember that some cultures are tough to blend. So, and we'll talk again about that a little bit. So these are the types of things I'm more focused on in due diligence than anything else. If my due diligence goes well, it's time to close the deal. I know that sounds very simple, but too many people make a big deal out of it. We meet, we share information, we get an offer's accepted, we do due diligence. If due diligence checks out, let's close the deal. And now is the time to bring in an attorney. A lot of people will have attorneys involved earlier than this. And unless the attorney has a significant amount of experience in M&A of accounting firms, they're not as valuable, and they could actually be a little bit of a distraction. You know, I don't care if you've done a whole bunch of dental practices. A dental practice, for example, sold in a caveat emptor buyer beware way. The accounting, there's all sorts of things that are very unique to the profession. So, but once you have an agreement, it's time to have someone with expertise document the deal. Now, I often get asked the question of what's my opinion of the lawyer that makes the deal versus the lawyer that breaks the deal, and I'll share that very, very simply with you. You're the CPA. You're the expert in dollars and cents and deal structures and things of that nature. If you believe this is a deal that makes sense for you, the attorney who comes in and wants to renegotiate the deal is going to end up killing the deal and killing your pocketbook with fees. The attorney that says, hey, you're the expert. My job is to make sure that the deal is drafted in a way that memorializes what you've agreed to and protects you, is the attorney that's going to help you make the deal. See, a contract isn't a tool for negotiations. A contract should memorialize what we've agreed to. When you try and turn it into a way of tricking people, it comes back to haunt you almost all the time, because now it's a trust factor. And the trust is what got us to the point of closing the deal. Once you lose the trust, you're probably going to lose the deal. So it's important that a contract doesn't bring new items to it. If there's something new the lawyer thought of that is important, you have a conversation about it before they see it in the contract. So we close the deal. So those are the roadmaps, but there's always a lot of... But we have to do a couple more polling questions or you're going to get nothing for it. So let's do one more now, and we'll save the last one for later as we go into the new category of roadblocks.
Okay, thanks, Joel. The question you have on the screen here is about your most likely succession plan. Does that look like finding an external buyer, selling internally to your partners or staff, or you have no idea? So this one's pretty quick, just 3 options. We'll give everyone about 10 more seconds to give their answer. This is our 3rd polling question today, and you need to do 3 out of the 4 to get your CPE credit. Okay, Joel, it looks like nearly everyone has answered. I'll show the results there. 52% say that they're likely to find an external buyer, 26% selling internally to partners or staff.
Okay, thank you so much. You know, when you're a sole practitioner or even a 2-partner firm, it's very rare you can execute an internal succession plan. I mean, it's a financial issue. For example, if I'm going to have someone who's a partner level person be there for 4, 5, 6 years before I retire, I have to pay them a lot more money than I need to pay someone who can just help me get the work done. So that means for 4, 5, 6 years, I have to make a lot less money to have my successor there. So that's why usually we're going to be looking to an external solution when it comes time to succession. But we've put together this roadmap But what we all know is there's road bumps along the road maps. So let's take a look at some of the biggest roadblocks we run into and discuss them. The first one is time. We have all heard for most of our business careers that time kills all deals. But how often have we heard why time kills all deals? And if you understand why time kills all deals, you can avoid some of these roadblocks. First of all, let's remember, if I'm selling and you're buying, no matter how friendly we are, it's hard to be in a more adversarial place. I want to get paid as much as I can. You want to pay me as little as you can. It's just the nature of what it is. The longer we're in negotiations, the more likely this adversarial nature is going to come out. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a position where someone said to me, Joel, I don't care if they want diamonds for nickels, one more change and I'm out of here. One more time we're going to have to go through this same issue. I'm out of here. Just last month in Chicago, I had a deal that was going so smoothly. Then they kept dragging and kept dragging. And then all of a sudden, because they kept dragging, new issues came to everybody's mind. And what looked like a simple process became so complicated that it became adversarial. The warm and fuzzies disappeared. And now both firms are looking for new mates. You know, one of the biggest issues that people don't realize why, and this relates to time, is the message you send. Let me give you a great example. Last year on the West Coast, we were working on a merger. It was a fairly large merger. It was a $6 million firm going into a top 100 firm. And it was early October, and the $6 million firm called me up and said, Joel, can you ask them for a copy of their employee handbook? I'd like to take a look to see how perks, benefits, vacations, things match up to see what headaches we may have when we merge. A very lucid, appropriate request. So I called the managing partner of this top 100 firm, and I asked him for that. And he said to me, you know, Joel, it's October 5th or 6th, whatever it was. And we have the October 15th deadline, like this person was doing a lot of tax returns, by the way. And then I'm going away for a week, so I promise I'll get it to you before Halloween. So I said to him, Mark, let me ask you a question. Do you have any clients that pay you more than $100,000 a year? And he says, of course, you know I do. I said, so if they called you and asked you for something sitting on your desktop or on your assistant's desktop, you would tell them you'll get back to them in 3 weeks before you attach it to an email and send it to them? And he got very angry at me. He said, Joel, how do you compare the two? One person's a $100,000 plus a year client paying me money. This is a deal I'm working on. I said, let me tell you how I compare it. This is a $6 million deal. There's nothing on your desk that should be more important. They are the potential biggest client you have. And the problem is the message you're sending, because you're sending one of two messages to this $6 million firm. Message one is, I'm so damn busy, I can't get you this for 3 weeks, but how am I going to handle another $6 million in revenue? Or this just isn't the priority to me. I'm not saying they're going to definitely feel that way, but it's highly likely they're going to feel one of those two things. He calmed down and sent me the thing right away. You see, it is the messages you send. If I'm merging up or I'm selling, there is nothing on my plate that's that I'm more emotionally invested in, professionally, keeping me up at night. If I ask you a question and it takes you a long time to get back to me, that's the type of message I'm interpreting. I'm interpreting this as something that you're not treating it as important as it is to me, or you're really busy. Am I sure you're going to handle this? And if this is how I'm being treated during the dating process, what's going to happen once we get married? So it's very important that we keep communication flowing, because of the perception that when it's not flowing, there's an alternative agenda or an issue. The longer people negotiate, the more likely leaks come, and staff, clients, competitors start to hear about things, which could have a terrible impact on you. Given the first draft of a contract, the 13th time they've read it, it suddenly means something completely different. There's no avoiding that. It's just be aware of it. The other thing is, the longer you're in dialogue, the more likely competition will step in and find out that you're in dialogue and try and jump into your deal or do something negative. Time kills all deals, and that's part of the reasons. There's other roadblocks that we have to be careful and learn how to navigate. One of the things is having unity of partners. Whether you're the mergee or the mergor, You have to go into this with a plan that everybody believes in, everybody supports. Sometimes you get the tail wagging the dog where you have a 6-partner firm, 5 partners are enthusiastic about it, 1 partner is very down about it, and it drags the whole process down and kills it. You have to have unity of partners when you're going into these situations. You have to be realistic about your capacity to take on the work that you're going to take on, especially in a situation that involves succession. So capacity, or lack thereof, could be a substantial roadblock. Having a lack of patience in the deal can be hurtful for both sides as well. Again, remember something that I haven't said nearly enough, and I've only alluded to it. Mergers and acquisitions are much more of an emotional issue than a financial one. Financially, I've been involved in hundreds of closings. The money's easy. I'm not going to be Santa Claus and give away my practice. Nobody's going to buy my practice and lose money. We all know that. I'm not going to do a merger where I merge into the firm and make less money and become a clock-punching employee when right now I'm the managing partner. There are certain things that are no-brainers. We're going to get past all that. Where you're going to have the issues are the emotions, and impatience is an emotion that reacts emotionally. And the transitional issues, which we'll speak better about, retaining staff and clients. Even IT can be a roadblock, as I discussed earlier, that some people are getting very concerned about whether or not the firm they're merging with has embraced technology to the same degree that they have. A couple other roadblocks to be aware of. The big one is equity. I've had a lot of people make a big thing about equity, and sometimes it's a real challenge. In our DC office, a little while ago, we had a 3-partner firm doing $2 million. One of the partners only owned 10% of the equity, hasn't brought in any business, but had been an employee for a long time, and they basically, as a retention tool, gave her 10% equity. But now they're looking to merge into a larger firm, and she's an equity partner. But she has ownership equivalent of $200,000, 10% of $2 million. Every firm they've spoken to, which has been firms from $7 million up, none of them were willing to make someone an equity partner who's coming in with such a small ownership or book of business. So sometimes that's where, again, you get to the tail wagging the dog. So what does equity mean? How important is it? Does everybody have to have it day one? That's why a lot of firms have created these non-equity partner roles as a landing place for some people. If I'm 64 years old and I want to work 3 more years, do I have to have equity day one if they have a policy about surrendering equity at 64 or 65? And what does equity even mean? In some firms, equity means everything. In those firms, I understand the battle, why I want to have more equity. If equity impacts my voting and my profit distribution and my buyout, then there's firms where equity has no meaning. It's 1 partner, 1 vote. Buyouts are based on compensation, not ownership. Profits based on formulas and books of business and not equity. So equity can be a roadblock, and sometimes it's a roadblock doesn't need to be. Firm name could be a big issue. I've got to have my name in the firm. Again, we're going to talk a few minutes about properly transitioning clients, but firm name could be a big issue. Now, remember something. Be careful what you ask for. To have your name in the firm, you have to have equity. And if I'm retiring, all that's giving me is liability and exposure. There are certain tricks you could do. If Gretchen and Nikki buy my practice, I could start in the first year by having Joel Sink and CPA PC, division of Gretchen and Nikki LLP. And then after the first tax season, just go back to Gretchen and Nikki LLP. So there's intermediate steps that I can take. But demanding my name in the firm, having poor communication, having unneeded must-haves. You must keep this staff person for the next 20 years. That's a very challenging roadblock, all right? And also, as I alluded to, some cultures are really tough to mix than others. For example, if it's a merger, and I'm merging into Terry Putney's firm, and Terry's firm operates under the culture of one firm client. There's no my client, your client. We're all firm clients. But my firm is a book of business firm, where both our compensation, jobs, and everything is based on the book of business me and my partner manage. That's a tough culture to blend. Book of business or eat what you kill types of firms with the one firm client. Just as some firms who are pure retainers or fixed fees, Then also they go with a firm that's all time and billing or value billing. Those could be challenging things. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's a roadblock that you should acknowledge up front and figure out how to mitigate it or realize that you can't. And there are certain things you could do to make your firm more attractive. As you've heard, technology has become an issue. If you're paperless, you're on the cloud, you're going to be more attractive as a merger candidate. Even if we're on different platforms of software, but we're both have embraced technology. If I'm selling, it's a little less important. If one of the efforts I can try and make, which is really hard when you're a small firm, but try and get the clients more loyal to the brand than the partner. Try and get the clients dealing with some of the staff and things so that everything doesn't revolve around the individual partner. That does make your firm easier to sell and merge because it's easier to transition. Having well-trained clients is a good thing. I have a firm that came to us in Philadelphia area last year that their average client was between 180 days and 210 days late in payment. Well, one of the big issues in any merger they were talking about is how are they going to fund the operation of the practice if they're going to be, for the first 6 months of operating, everything they're collecting is going back to the mergee. How are they going to manage this from a cash flow? Now, we came up with a solution about using their AR whip and having a payout period, but having poorly trained clients who are terribly spoiled, who pay when they want to pay, who call you on Saturday at 8 o'clock at night on your cell phone, those things don't make your practice more attractive. All right? One of the other issues that we have is a lot of us as accountants have impeccable records of our clients and horrific records of our own practice. I met with someone that I was doing a workshop for, and when I asked him, based on a question he had asked me, what his net was, he said, "Son, whatever's left." So what does that mean? He goes, after I pay my staff and my overhead, whatever's left is mine. And it changes all the time. He had no idea. And it's very hard to enter into a merger dialogue if you don't understand the metrics and have accurate information of what your practice is. And you got to have realistic terms. I had someone give us a call just very, very recently from the Midwest who called me up about a succession plan. When I asked him what value he was seeking and he told me, I said to him, "Have you ever helped any of your clients buy a business?" He said, "Of course I have." I said, "Did you ever tell them I just did my due diligence, and if you buy this business, you're going to lose money for 5 years. It's a great deal. You got to do it." He said, "Why would I do that?" I said, "Well, why would you ask for the terms you just asked for? Here you are, a firm making 40%, asking us to pay you 1.5 times in 3 years, which is 50% of collections for 3 years. Who would do that deal?" He goes, "Oh, you don't understand. At the end of the whole 3 years, they own my practice." I said, "Nobody's going to go there." You have to have realistic terms. So these are some of the things that make you more attractive as a practice. But at the end of the day, we always go back to the same issues, all right? Chemistry, chemistry, chemistry. Are we comfortable with each other? Will our clients and staff buy into each other's culture? Are we going to be able to maintain a level of continuity that clients will perceive this as the gain, not a loss? Do they have the capacity and skill set to replace the people that are looking to slow down, if any? Let's remember, a good deal is a fair deal for both. The successor firm gets a benefit. The retiring partners get paid for their years of sweat equity. All right? And don't negotiate things individually. Everything's a package. You can't negotiate buyouts until you've figured out payout periods, retention periods, tax structure, cash up front, if any, treatment of AR. All of these things are related to each other. And let's also remember that in today's world, having competent, good staff is a huge asset. Very hard to attract talent these days. If you have some good talent in your firm, that's going to also make your firm more attractive. And we have to look at, are we going to be able to retain the two staffs when we do this merger, just as we have to look at whether we can retain the clients. But at the end of the day, the truest measure of success of any deal is client retention. And in 5 minutes, I'm going to in 30 seconds, I'm going to give you a quick 5 minutes on the keys to retaining clients as we end today's session. But let's do our last polling question, and then we'll hit our last topic of client retention.
Okay. Our last polling question is on the screen. Which of these best describes your current firm goals? Are you actively involved in a merger or acquisition? Are you exploring the marketplace, or do you plan on remaining the same? We'll leave it open about 10 more seconds. And I'll go ahead and close the poll. The results there show 48% say that they're exploring, 21% are actively involved, and 31% plan on remaining the same.
Well, I strongly hope that today's session puts everybody on a path to make it a little bit better. But the greatest measure of success of any deal, as I keep saying, is client retention. So what can we do to maximize client retention? We have to go into a deal with a proper transition plan of how we're going to communicate things to clients, how we're going to communicate the new roles and changes to the staff members. And the trick of the whole trade is going to be we're going to use the age of specialization to gain that. So before we start the process, one of the things we have to do is understand the client's fears, which we're going to talk about in one moment. And once we've identified the fears, then we're going to make a decision on how we're going to communicate these things to the clients. Who gets a phone call, who gets a visit, who gets a letter, and when. For example, I wouldn't send a letter out to a $50,000 a year client. They get a visit. But let me give you a hard lesson. When they get a visit, it should be both by the seller or mergee and the mergor together. I remember in 1992, a client of mine who went to his biggest client and told him about this great merger they were doing, and the whole thing at the end of the meeting, the client said to him, "Murray, that's great, but you're the only one I deal with." If we would have brought John with him, his new quote-unquote partner, the client would have said, "John, nice to meet you. Never show up here ever again. I only deal with Murray." Murray empowered the client to be the decision maker instead of leading the client to the promised land. So who gets a letter? Who gets a visit? Who gets a phone call? When do they get a letter? If I close a deal in June, and there are certain clients that I only deal with during tax season, never hear from them, do I send them a letter in June and give them a year to think about it, or do I wait till the tax organizer in January? Even when I send them a letter, I better send it in the seller or mergee's envelope. Because if I send it in the new firm's envelope, a lot of people won't open it. They'll think it's a solicitation. So who gets a letter? Who gets a phone call? Who gets a visit? How are we going to present the name of the firm? Is it going to be division of, or are we not worried about the name? But let's think of change in two ways, because change is what we're afraid of. Change is what this is all about. There's change behind the door and change in front of the door. Here's an example of change behind the door. You were using Lacert, I'm using CCH. Let me tell you, none of your clients care. That's a staff issue potentially, but certainly not a client issue. So that's a change behind the door. The other change is a change in front of the door would be something like a fee change. Hey, it used to be that you paid me $500 a quarter. Now I'm getting paid $200 an hour, and everything's by the hour. I used to visit you quarterly. Now I'm only going to visit you annually. These are all changes in front of the door, and you need to be very careful because changes behind the door could be implemented almost right away. Changes behind the door have to be done gradually. So let's tie this into what's our biggest fear. When a client hears about a merger, there's four things that goes through their mind at most. The first one is the person I trust still there? The second one is this going to cost me more money? The third one, for those who go visit the accountant, is do I now have to drive someplace out of my way to see my accountant? And for those that are working with staff as well as the principals, is the staff I'm accustomed to working with still there? So if we were going to send an announcement letter, we should deal, as an example, we should deal with all four of those issues. So let's say Nikki bought my practice. I would divide my clients into categories. Let's say one of the categories is doctors. So I'm sending a letter to Dr. Smith. I'd write, "Dear Dr. Smith, I'm pleased to announce I've merged my firm with Nikki Johnston. Nikki's an expert in the Obama tax laws and the modern computerization of accounting, specifically as it relates to the medical community. Having her on our team will enable us to provide you additional services because of her expertise, but we're still going to operate under the same fee structure. I remain the principal in charge of you as a client. The staff that you're used to dealing with are part of our new combined dedicated team of professionals, and we remain geographically sensitively located here in Kansas City, Missouri." So what did I just do? In the very first paragraph, I took away all their fears. I'm still there. Your staff's still here. The fee's the same. But I brought in an expert in your industry who's going to help me service you. So what am I focusing on? I'm not focusing on the loss of my firm. I'm focusing on the gain of our combined successor firm. So this is a very critical process. Now, obviously, transitioning clients and staff in itself is an entire CPE class. So this was just a quick Reader's Digest version. But remember, change is a dirty word. If you focus on the gain, on continuity, you'll be able to retain the clients. And that's the biggest thing we all need to focus on. Now, in wrapping up today's session, a couple of things one thing I promised the AICPA, they put together a tremendous succession planning resource center on your page right now, and all of you should have access to this PowerPoint. Anybody doesn't have it, email us, we'll send it to you. There's all sorts of tools they've put together with succession timing, step, readiness assessments, all sorts of things, great stuff. Also on our website is a lot of information. We're not so sophisticated that you have to sign in or anything like that. But I will tell you, particularly under our website, there's a place called Resources. And under Resources, there's a ton of articles that have been written on client retention, due diligence, on the 7 steps, how to value a practice, how mergers work, what's the keys to your partnership agreement. All these things are there. They're free. They're available. Take advantage of them anytime, as well as a listing of the CPE classes that we're doing. So I hope today's session brought everybody the value. I hope you'll consider joining us for additional sessions in the future. If any of you have questions that you think about that you'd like to address, shoot us an email. We'll be happy to still respond to your questions, even if it's after today's session. So, Nikki, thank you so much for helping us get this done. And everybody have a great day.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Bye-bye.